I was halfway through cleaning out my pool filter when I heard the unmistakable squeal of overpriced sandals scraping concrete at high speed. "Excuse me." "Wesley," came the shrill voice of Veronica Renshaw, head of our HOA and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac. Her two kids, Nalin and Natalie, trailed behind her in matching swimsuits like they were about to star in a toothpaste commercial. I groaned. "Veronica, what now?" "Your pool," she said, jabbing a manicured finger toward it. "It's community-adjacent property. I've checked the bylaws." "That means other residents, especially board members, should have reasonable access." I blinked. "Community-adjacent, that's not even a thing." She stepped closer, her giant sunglasses reflecting my annoyed face. "Wesley, the HOA has discussed this. You're the only one on the block with a pool, and we all agreed it would be fair for others to use it occasionally." I set the pool skimmer down. "No, you don't get to vote on using my private property. This isn't a clubhouse. I pay the water bill, the maintenance, and every damn chlorine tab. This is my backyard." Veronica scoffed and waved her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "You're being hostile. You know I could write you up for that. There's a tone clause in the conduct code." I stared at her. "A tone clause, watch it," she warned. "You're already on thin ice for not trimming your front hedge to regulation height last month." That was a lie. I trimmed it the day after the last warning. I knew she was bluffing, but I wasn't biting. Instead, I walked over to the gate and shut it behind me. "Pool's closed to everyone but me," I said flatly. That's when Veronica put her hands on her hips and barked at her kids, "Go on in, he's bluffing." Nalin took a step forward, but I held up my phone. "Try it and I'll call the cops. Trespassing." Veronica's eyes widened. "You wouldn't dare. Try me." She whipped out her phone like it was a weapon. "Fine, I'll call them first. Let's see how they feel about your little private pool policy." She dialed. "Yes, I need officers at 412 Westwood Drive immediately. We have a man being aggressive and denying neighborhood children access to a shared amenity." "Yes, it's urgent." I rolled my eyes and walked back to my lawn chair. She kept yelling into the phone, throwing in words like hostile, threatening, and community safety. What she didn't know was that I had security cameras running and every word she said was being recorded. Then my phone rang. The ringtone echoed across the yard, loud, sharp, and sudden. Veronica jumped like someone had fired a gun. She spun around, eyes wild. "What was that?" "Whose phone is that?" I answered, keeping my voice calm. "Mine, it's my attorney." She stared at me like I had just summoned a demon. Why would you call a lawyer?" I smiled, holding up the phone. "Because I'm documenting everything, including your false 911 report, which, by the way, is a criminal offense." Her face twisted. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" I didn't answer. I just sat back down and watched her pacing, sweating, and waiting for the sirens that she thought would come to save her. But they wouldn't be saving her. Not this time. 15 minutes passed. Veronica paced the sidewalk like she was on a runway made of hot coals, checking her phone every 20 seconds, glancing toward the street, then back at me like she expected me to dissolve under the heat of her irritation. "Are you seriously not even going to apologize?" she snapped. I didn't respond. I was too busy reviewing the footage from one of the backyard cameras, making sure the audio had picked up every word of her earlier tantrum. It had, crystal clear, including the part where she made a knowingly false emergency call. "Oh, this is rich," I muttered to myself. "You're cooked. Excuse me?" she barked. I didn't look up. "Nothing. Just reviewing my insurance documents, you know, in case someone decides to make unauthorized use of my property again." That got her attention. "You're threatening legal action now." "Against children?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. I finally stood. "No, I'm protecting myself from a grown adult who thinks property lines are suggestions. And if you're going to keep tossing around accusations, I'd recommend you wait until the officers get here. That way you can explain everything directly to them. You did call them, right?" She crossed her arms and turned her back to me. "They're just taking their time. It's not a priority call." "Ah," I said, casually walking toward the side gate. so now it's not urgent. Because you said it was an emergency. That's what you told dispatch. She didn't turn around. I stepped out front, just in time to see a patrol car roll around the corner. It wasn't speeding. No lights, no sirens. Just the casual crews of officers who already knew they were answering nonsense. As the squad car pulled up, Veronica practically lunged toward it, waving her arms. "Officers, over here." Both officers stepped out slowly, one of them adjusting his sunglasses, the other glancing toward me behind the gate. "Ma'am," the taller one said, "you reported a man being aggressive and denying community access to a shared facility." "Yes, exactly," Veronica said, nodding furiously. "He's refusing to let my children swim in the neighborhood pool." The officer glanced at me, then back at her. "Which address did you say the pool is registered to?" She blinked. "Well, it's in his backyard, but so it's a private residence?" "Well, yes, but it's part of the neighborhood, so, ma'am, a private backyard pool is not a community amenity." "That's not how shared facilities work." Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The other officer turned to me. "Sir, any reason you'd like to add for denying access?" I nodded. "Yes, I have security footage of her instructing her kids to enter my yard without permission. I also have the full recording of her phone call to dispatch. She knowingly made a false report. I'd like to file a formal complaint." The taller officer tensed. "You have the recording?" "I do. Audio and video, multiple cameras, all time-stamped." Veronica's face drained of color. "Wait, you don't need to do that. It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to say it was an emergency. I was just concerned." The shorter officer narrowed his eyes. "You said the man was being aggressive. Do you have any proof he threatened you or your children?" She hesitated. "Not exactly, but his tone was very confrontational." "Tense conversation isn't grounds for an emergency call," he said flatly. "Especially not when kids are involved. That kind of misuse ties up real resources." I stepped forward, holding out a thumb drive. "Here's the footage." I made a copy. The taller officer took it. "We'll review this and speak with the city prosecutor. If the report is confirmed false, there may be charges." Veronica snapped out of it. "You're seriously going to believe him over me?" "I'm the HOA president." The shorter officer looked at her like she'd just confessed to shoplifting. "Ma'am, HOA status doesn't override the law. If anything, it means you should know better." "I was just trying to make the neighborhood more friendly." "My kids have nowhere to swim." "That's not this man's responsibility," the taller officer said. "You can't commandeer private property just because your title says president on a newsletter." She turned to me, eyes burning. "You're doing this on purpose." "You've always had it out for me." I raised an eyebrow. "You tried to rewrite the bylaws last month to ban pickup trucks from driveways. I drive a Silverado, so yeah, I've noticed the pattern." The officers exchanged glances. The taller one spoke again. "Sir, we'll file a report and get back to you once the footage is reviewed. For now, if she approaches you again in a threatening manner, call us directly. Don't engage." "I won't," I said. "Thanks for coming out." They turned back toward Veronica. "As for you, ma'am, I suggest you return home. And don't make any more calls unless there's an actual emergency. Misuse of 911 is no joke." They got back into the cruiser and drove off. Veronica stood there, stunned, watching the car disappear down the street. Her kids had wandered over to the curb, clearly bored and uninterested in whatever power trip their mother was crashing. "You've ruined everything," she hissed, eyes still locked on the road. "And you've just made yourself a legal liability," I said. "Congratulations." She spun around and stormed off, dragging her kids with her like deflated balloons. I waited until they were gone before heading inside. I had some calls to make, first to my lawyer, then to a friend on the city council. Because if Veronica thought she could abuse her post without consequence, she was about to learn that not every neighbor rolls over when power gets misused. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about setting the record straight once and for all, and I had the receipts. By the following afternoon, the neighborhood group chat was on fire. I didn't say a word in it, but I read every message. Screenshots of Veronica's outburst were circulating thanks to a couple of residents who had quietly installed their own doorbell cameras. The consensus was clear. She'd gone too far this time. Around 5 o'clock, I got a call from Maya, one of the newer homeowners on the block. She worked nights as an ICU nurse and slept during the day, which meant she'd had a front row seat to the chaos right outside her window. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Wesley, do you have a minute? I think you should see something." I walked over to her place, just 2 houses down. When she opened the door, she looked exhausted but determined. She waved me inside without a word and led me to her small kitchen table where her laptop was open. She clicked play on a video. It was grainy, black and white, time-stamped from 3 nights earlier at around 2 in the morning. The camera showed Veronica and a man I recognized as Dale, the HOA's treasurer, skulking behind Maya's neighbor's fence line with flashlights. "I thought this was just noise at first," Maya said, "but listen." Veronica's voice was faint but clear. "If we mark it 1 foot over, no one will notice." "It's not their original boundary anyway." Then Dale. "That gives us enough for the new easement clause. I'll get the draft ready for the vote." Maya paused the video. "They were trying to move the property lines," she said. "And they didn't realize my back camera was facing that fence." I stared at the screen. "They were planning to redraw boundaries to take land from people. It's not just me," she said. 2 others on this side got notices from the HOA last week saying their fences were encroaching. They were told to remove them or face fines. This wasn't just power tripping anymore. This was fraud. I forwarded the video to my attorney, then called a friend I'd served with, now a detective in the county's Special Investigations Unit. I laid out everything: Veronica's false emergency call, the attempt to seize private property, and now the conspiracy to alter official easements. He didn't even hesitate. "I'll loop in zoning enforcement and kick this to the DA's office. Keep collecting evidence." By the next morning, a city zoning inspector was on our street. He knocked on doors, clipboard in hand, asking homeowners about recent HOA notices related to fences, landscaping, and shared property. I watched from my porch as he shook his head repeatedly, clearly unimpressed. At noon, a plain black SUV rolled up and 2 county investigators stepped out. They weren't here for questions. They walked straight to Veronica's house and knocked with the kind of authority that gets attention. She opened the door, still wearing her robe, and visibly recoiled when they flashed badges. I couldn't hear much from my porch, but my phone buzzed 10 minutes later. "Meyer again. They just read her rights," she said. "They're taking her in." I walked to the sidewalk just as they guided her into the back seat. Dale came running from his house, muttering about lawyers and procedural errors. One of the investigators turned and handed him a folded document. It was a search warrant. Over the next hour, they boxed up folders, USB drives, and even a desktop computer tower from Veronica's home. Meanwhile, Dale tried to call an emergency HOA meeting, but no one showed up, not even the secretary, who had apparently resigned that morning. The rumor mill churned fast. By dinner time, 3 homeowners had come forward with letters they'd received from the HOA attempting to charge land use fees for their own driveways. Another neighbor, a former paralegal, uncovered that the HOA had quietly amended the bylaws 6 months ago to allow the board to repurpose underutilized spaces for communal enrichment. The language was vague on purpose. And now it was evidence. I didn't say much publicly. I didn't need to. The neighborhood was starting to realize what kind of racket had been running under their noses. The same people who had once nodded politely at the HOA meetings were now organizing their own. This time without board oversight. 3 days later, a special hearing was held at the municipal building. Word had spread well beyond our street. Local reporters lined the back wall as the assistant district attorney laid out the case against Veronica and Dale. Unlawful misrepresentation of property boundaries, fraudulent amendment of governing documents, falsification of financial records. Filing a false emergency report. The list went on. I sat in the second row, arms folded, watching as Veronica's lawyer tried to spin the narrative. My client believed she was acting in the best interest of the community. She was overzealous, perhaps, but her intent was never malicious. The ADA didn't even flinch. Intent is irrelevant when the law is broken this deliberately. After the hearing, I was approached by the city's zoning commissioner. He thanked me for what he called a rare act of homeowner courage. I just told him the truth, that I'd had enough, and that the cameras were just the beginning. The commissioner nodded. We're moving to suspend the HOA's authority pending a forensic audit. The board will be dissolved if criminal activity is confirmed. It was confirmed. A week later, a notice was posted on every mailbox. Effective immediately, the current HOA board is hereby suspended. Oversight will be transferred to an interim committee with city-appointed supervision. The neighborhood felt different after that. Lighter. Mailboxes weren't tagged with warnings anymore. Kids could ride their bikes without being told their helmets weren't color-coordinated with the community aesthetic. People started talking to each other again. I got a handwritten card 2 weeks later. No return address, just a quick note. Thank you for standing up. We didn't know how much we needed it. I kept it on my fridge. As for Veronica, she was hit with misdemeanor charges for filing the false report, along with being named in the civil fraud case that followed. Dale tried to claim he was just the numbers guy, but his signature was on too many documents. They both quietly sold their homes within months. The new HOA committee was made up of actual neighbors, a retired firefighter, a school counselor, and an architect. People who remembered that a community was made of people, not power plays, and the pool still mine, still private. But now, once in a while, I invite a few folks over on weekends, not because I have to, because they asked, respectfully, and brought pizza. It had been nearly 4 weeks since Veronica was escorted off our street by investigators, and the dust had only just started to settle. The city had appointed an interim oversight committee, and the forensic audit was well underway. Most of us were still waiting to see just how deep the rabbit hole went, but the early signs weren't subtle. For the first time in years, the neighborhood newsletter didn't arrive with threats disguised as reminders. I was sitting on my back patio one evening, grilling a few burgers while flipping through the stack of new documents my lawyer had sent over. They were discovery files, internal HOA emails, financial statements, and minutes from meetings that had never been shared with residents. Most of it was dry, but one thread caught my attention. A message from Veronica to Dale, dated nearly 2 months before the pool incident. If we can't pass the easement expansion through the vote, we'll phase it in under maintenance access. The homeowners won't catch it until it's already on paper. I leaned back in my chair, letting that sink in. They'd planned to exploit loopholes in the maintenance clause to quietly extend their control over private yards. It wasn't just an overreach. It was theft by paperwork. The next morning, I walked over to the temporary office the oversight committee had set up in the old community center. It was a modest space, barely furnished, but it had something the old regime had never allowed: transparency. "Morning, Wesley," said Clara, the retired firefighter now chairing the interim board. "You look like you've seen something interesting." I handed her the printed email exchange. She read it silently, then passed it to the city-appointed legal advisor sitting beside her. "We suspected as much," the advisor said. "This aligns with the testimony we received from 2 former board members who resigned last year. They claimed they were pressured to approve budget increases that didn't add up." Clara tapped the page. "You think this is enough to trigger criminal intent?" The legal advisor set the paper down. "With everything else, absolutely. Fraudulent misrepresentation of authority, unlawful property annexation attempts, document falsification, it's all stacking up. I'll add this to the evidence packet for the prosecutor." I left the office feeling both relieved and unsettled. The neighborhood was healing, but the damage Veronica and her inner circle had done wasn't just about rules and fences. It had been about power, stealthy, predatory power. 2 days later, subpoenas were issued to 3 more former board members. One of them, a guy named Warren who used to handle community development, was picked up by state investigators for allegedly forging approval signatures on internal expense reports. He'd been funneling HOA funds into a fake landscaping company, one that didn't exist outside a PO. Box in a strip mall, that broke the case wide open. The county sheriff held a press conference on the front lawn of the municipal building. Reporters gathered as he read out the charges: conspiracy to defraud, embezzlement, misuse of community funds, and unlawful modification of municipal records. Veronica, Dale, and Warren were named directly. The charges were serious felony level serious. I watched the whole thing from the back row, arms crossed, not because I wanted credit, but because I needed to see it through. For everyone who'd been bullied over mailbox paint colors, fined for wind chimes, or threatened with liens over imaginary infractions, this was vindication. After the press cleared out, I was approached by the assistant district attorney again. She was younger than I expected, but sharp. "We're filing for full restitution," she said. "If the judge awards it, every homeowner who was illegally fined or assessed will be reimbursed." "They'll finally get their money back," I asked. "Every cent we can recover." "And what about the pool incident?" I asked. "The 911 call," she nodded. "That's part of a separate case. False report, misuse of emergency services, and obstruction. The judge has already accepted the charges. We've scheduled a court date next month." I thanked her and left. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from the city, a formal request to attend the restitution hearing as a key witness. I agreed. Not for myself, I hadn't lost money, but for the others. The quiet neighbors who had been too afraid to fight back when they were told their porch chairs were unapproved. The hearing was held in district court, and it was packed. Over 30 residents showed up, some with folders full of fines and notices they'd kept over the years. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for hammering down on white-collar crime, listened patiently as the ADA laid out the evidence. Veronica sat at the defense table, her posture stiff, her eyes darting between her attorney and the floor. Dale looked like he'd aged 10 years. Warren didn't even try to make eye contact with anyone in the room. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. They didn't enforce rules. They enforced control, and when they couldn't get what they wanted through votes or policy, they tried to take it behind our backs. This wasn't about community, it was about leverage. The judge nodded once, then asked the ADA for a final statement. This HOA board weaponized their positions to exploit, intimidate, and defraud. The victims weren't just inconvenienced, they were financially harmed, psychologically pressured, and systematically misled. We ask the court to grant full restitution and permanent removal of the defendants from any future governance roles. The judge didn't even deliberate. She ruled from the bench. All restitution requests are approved. The defendants are barred from serving in any official capacity within residential organizations for life. Sentencing on criminal charges will be conducted in separate proceedings. Court is adjourned. The room erupted not in applause but in a collective exhale, the kind of release that only comes after holding something in for too long. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. Not just physically, though. The sun-bleached "no parking" signs Veronica had installed were quietly removed, but in spirit. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down were now planning block parties. Sidewalk chalk drawings appeared on driveways. Porch furniture came back, mismatched and glorious. One morning, I found a small envelope tucked under my doormat. Inside was a gift card to a local hardware store and a note that simply read, "For the man who remembered what a boundary really means." I used it to buy new solar lights for my backyard, nothing fancy, just enough to make the pool glow at night. A few evenings later, I had a few neighbors over. Kids splashed in the water, adults nursed cold drinks, and someone brought homemade empanadas. No one asked to use the pool. They waited for an invite. And they brought more than just themselves, they brought back the sense of community we'd forgotten we deserved. Veronica's house went up for sale. It was bought by a young couple who, during the first week after moving in, asked if there were any rules they should know about. I told them the truth. There are a few, I said, but none that override common sense or decency. They laughed. We shook hands. And just like that, the neighborhood moved on. Justice had been served. Not with drama, with documentation, determination, and just the right ringtone at just the right moment.